Which is here? Speakers over there. It's a building over there.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Graham Parks to Lisbon and Portugal for the first time, is it? It is, the first time. The author of this wonderful book, which we were talking about, I think it's a bit of a sleeper, came out in 1994. It's called Composing the Soul. I highly recommend it. Reaches of Nietzsche's Psychology. And reading it myself, as this project began, I was astounded by so many parallels with Fernando Pessoa, looking at multiple selves, pluralities, and the use of masks, how to speak with different voices, amongst other things. Even the title itself, Composing the Soul, and the cover of the book showing the different faces, from Wagner to Cosima to Nietzsche himself, forming into his own philosophy. So I'm sure Graham will go off and will explain to you more in detail. But so Graham came to Fernando Pessoa later, as a Nietzschean scholar, but also he has written a lot on Japanese and Chinese philosophy and environmental philosophy, and is currently completing a book on climate change and China. And so he's very much a global philosopher, trying to find ways that breaks away from Western philosophy and looking at different aspects, both from East and West, which is badly needed in these days. So please welcome Graham Parks to the project and Fernando Pessoa Nietzsche.
Thank you. Bartholomew, it's a great pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Lisbon, in Portugal. Not for wanting to visit earlier, but I think Madrid maybe is the closest I've managed to find. Slightly larger country to your east. And I'm especially delighted to be here amongst people thinking about the multiple self in Nietzsche and Pessoa, because it's always seemed to me that this is a central aspect of Nietzsche's thinking that has been, like my book, massively neglected. Yes, I think the publisher called it a sleeper. It came out 20 years ago and was, yes, massively ignored. And sleep is the brother of death, as all poets know, so I will probably be long dead before it gets recognized for the avant-garde masterpiece that it is. Because, I'll just say, there are two things in the book. I mean, I spend the whole book really talking about Nietzsche's idea of the multiple self and how it might be composed, and by whom it might be composed, because it can't be composed by I, or me, or any singular ego, because it's already fallen apart by Nietzschean dissolution. So it has to be composed by the components themselves, and I eventually figured out, to my own satisfaction, that composition is political, that we should see it against the background of Plato's Republic, who's asking what's the best regime in the polis and in the individual soul, and because these are isomorphic, there's a macrocosm, microcosm relationship between them. I didn't have time, the damn thing got to be 500 pages long. I can't seem to write short books. I didn't have time to explore the two implications of this central idea in Nietzsche for philosophy generally. And I sort of asked, requested, challenged people to do it, since I had other things to do after that. Nobody's taken up that challenge except I think Bartholomew perhaps. Because, I mean, the implications for epistemology are extremely profound, because epistemology tends to assume one knower per human body. And Nietzsche says that's wrong from the get-go. There are at least 30, 40, 50 knowers in each person, which makes epistemology a much more complicated and, I think, interesting enterprise. The other area is ethics. If there are 30, 40, or 50 of us in each body deciding and acting, then who's responsible? Because that I that we think is in control is, Nietzsche says time and again, is a fiction, is a construct. It's something itself composed for good reason, for reasons of being able to handle this world, for being able to get by, get to work every morning, and so on. But for philosophers and poets, that's just a purely pragmatic fiction, and much more interesting is what's really going on behind that, that mask of unity. So, let me start with Pessoa, and what I'm going to do is, I was telling Bartholomew, I first read this book in not the Zenith translation, but whatever the other one is, because it was the only one I could get in Ireland, and then I ordered this Zenith one, and it came only recently, and so I had to go through again and sort of try to mark up all the things that I had marked before. So the second time through, I just got more and more amazed at what was going on in this book, and perhaps rather too amazed, because now I have far too much to say. And when I started to write it up, I started on one thing that seemed to me that hadn't occurred to me before, that I'll tell you about. And then by the time we get to the question, which for me is a very interesting one, is how does this multiplicity rise? Where does it come from? All these inner friends that Pessoa talks about. I'm going to have to sort of just play that one by ear. And in any case, I think I was told to expect a small group around the table, which is my favorite way of talking about things. And so we may well make the border between my somewhat formal presentation and our discussion as blurred as we can make it, because please don't hesitate at any point to interject, object, comment, question, and then I really look forward to, I could go on for several weeks on this topic, so I promised Bartholomew I wouldn't, but I'd rather that happen with us all talking. I've never done anything but dream, Pessoa writes in the book of Disquiet. That's on section 92 of this translation. This and this alone, he says, has been the meaning of my life. So it's clear from those two sentences that he's a poet in the true Nietzschean sense. And I'd like to start with a few remarks on Nietzsche's first published discussion of the multiple soul. The notebooks, it goes back to his childhood, but it's in the Birth of Tragedy. When he's talking about the Apolline and the Dionysian drives, and he says, as you know, these are drives, these are Triebe, that are first of all found in nature, long before the Greeks come along and have a pantheon. They are nature drives, the drive of dreaming, of image making for Apollo, and the drive of the sap up the vegetation in springtime and everything else that drives the natural world to do what it does in spring. So when beginning to talk about the Apolline drive, right in the first section of The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche writes, every human being is fully an artist when creating the worlds of dream. And the lovely semblance of dream is the precondition of all the arts of image making, including, as we shall see, an important half of poetry. So it's something that happens naturally, we dream naturally, and then we as human beings can take that over, that drive, and work with it. You might think, well, yes, and then I would do that, but for Nietzsche, we have to keep reminding ourselves, at least for my Nietzsche, That I is nothing more than a complex of drives, sometimes one drive dominating, or sometimes a committee, a group of drives. So for me, it's always a very good question that rarely gets asked, is who is doing the composing here? Who is doing the regime making? Who is doing anything? Because the answer in Nietzsche is very rarely simple. In section 7, Nietzsche goes on to a discussion of lyric poetry and the way that I think we should read in scare quotes, subjectivity of the lyric poet has been misunderstood as some kind of unity, because we get fooled by that little word, ich, or in English it's one of the few, well, it's one of several good things about English, that it's only one word, one letter long, and it's a nice sort of phallic, upstanding pillar of unity. But behind that little sign of unity, we shouldn't think that the subject, in scare quotes, of the lyric poet is anything simple or conscious or unified. So Nietzsche writes, you may know this passage, but I'll read it because it could be about Pessoa. Nothing can be more certain than this. What makes a poet is the fact that he sees himself surrounded by figures who live and act before him, and into whose innermost essence he gazes. To the poet, a character is not a whole composed of selected single features, but an insistently alive person whom he sees before his very eyes, and distinguished from a painter's vision of the same thing only by the fact that the poet sees the figure continuing to live and act over a period of time. And Pessoa says, I've known these people for decades. And just as if you follow your dreams, there will be characters that you don't even know from your so-called real life who appear again and again over the decades. Back to Nietzsche. Fundamentally, the aesthetic phenomenon is simple. One only has to have the ability to watch a living play, a Spiel, continuously, and to live constantly surrounded by crowds of spirits, then one is a poet. If one feels the impulse to transform oneself and to speak out of other bodies and souls, then one is a dramatist. And that second, more Dionysian take on it, I think it's important that we're speaking out of other bodies, because the body for Nietzsche is as much a multiplicity as the soul is. He says the body is a social structure of the drive and affects, just as the soul is. Both of them, he uses social metaphors. He talks about society and a society that works together. There's a political arrangement to it. And Pessoa talks about the society that he created within himself. So yes, Pessoa, this is the same section 92, is a very rich one for this topic. He talks about lining up the characters who occupy his inner life. He says, I have a world of friends inside me with their own real, individual, imperfect lives. Now what's interesting is